Hello and welcome back. Now we have our ammo pickup, and when we go and walk over it, we pick it up. But what I'd like to do now is set some locations for our ammo pickups to interpolate to that are different than our interpolation for weapons. When we pick up a weapon, the item interpolates right up to the front of the screen like that. But when we interpolate a ammo pickup, it goes up to the same location, but it doesn't quite look right. And also, if we have multiple ammo pickups, I want to be able to have different locations that they interpolate to. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, we're here in shooterCharacter.h, and I'm going to add some scene components. Now, recall that a scene component does not have a visual representation such as a mesh, but it does have a transform, so it has a location, rotation, and scale. Now we can use these as target locations to interpolate too. So let's go to our private section and let's create some scene component variables. So first I'm going to make a uScene component. That's a pointer, and I'm going to call this interpcomp1. Now I want this component to be visible in blueprints. So I'm going to give this a U property, and I'm going to make this edit defaults only. I'll make this blueprint read only, and let's give this the meta specifier allow private access equals true. Now I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to make 5 more, so we have a total of 6. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I think I did one too many. We want 6 total. So the first one is called interpcomp1. The second one we'll call interpcomp2. The third one will be interpcomp3. The fourth one will be 4. The fifth one will be 5. And the sixth one, interpcomp6. Now, since we're using scene components to interpolate our ammo to, I'm going to add another interpolation uScene component for the weapon that we can use. So I'm going to create another uScene component and call this weapon interpcomp. Now, we have these uScene component pointers which are empty until we construct them. So we're going to construct these in the constructor. So here in shooterCharacter.cpp, we'll go all the way up to the constructor here, and here at the end of the constructor, we're going to start constructing these. So we're going to say weapon interpcomp equals create default subobject, and this will be a uScene component. And I'm going to give this text and say weapon interpolation component. Now I'm going to attach all of these scene components to the camera, and that's because wherever we move the camera, we want those interpolation components to move relative to the camera. So we're going to interpolate to locations just in front of the camera. So we're going to say weapon interpcomp setup attachment, and we're going to use the follow camera. So we can say get follow camera. We're going to do the same exact thing for all 6 of our interpolation components. So we're going to say interpcomp1 equals create default subobject uScene component. We're going to give this a text with a name and call this interpolation component 1. And we'll say interpcomp1 setup attachment get follow camera. Now, since we're doing the same exact thing for all the other ones, I'm going to copy and paste this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And now we need to be careful. When you copy and paste code like this, it's very dangerous because you need to go in and change it where it needs to be changed, and you can't forget to change it in every single place it needs to be changed. So for the second one, instead of interpcomp1, this needs to be interpcomp2. So we need to change that on both lines. And then we need to change the text here where it says interpolation component 1. It needs to say 2 there. If it has the same name as another component, we will have an error, so it won't work. Next one is interp_comp 3. So change it on both variables on both lines and change it in the text string. Next we have 4, so we'll change that. Next is 5, we'll change that to 5. And then finally interp_comp 6, we'll change that here. And we'll go ahead and just put a comment above weapon interp_comp and say create interpolation components. So now we have interpolation components that are scene components. We're going to go ahead and compile this now and then head back into the editor. Okay, we've compiled. So back here in the editor, we're going to open up the character blueprint for shooter character. Okay, so we now have our interpolation components. These are scene components and they're attached to the follow camera. Now we need to set their location relative to the camera, and these will be interpolation target locations for when we pick up items. Now, if we just select one and we see that they have their own position here in the world, we can move them around, but we can't really see them unless they're selected. And I want to be able to see them all at the same time. So we can give these some preview meshes. We can attach a static mesh to each one of these components just so we can see it while we're working. So let's add a static mesh to each of these components. So I've got weapon interp_comp selected. I'm going to click add component and search for static mesh, and I'm going to call this WIC for weapon interp_comp _ SM for static mesh. That's a weapon interp_comp static mesh, and I'm going to give this a static mesh of a weapon. Now there's a weapon called SM_AR4, and that's an assault rifle, and here you'll see that it looks like a machine gun. Now this is attached to the weapon interp_comp, so we can move our weapon interp_comp and this static mesh will move along with it. So I'm going to select weapon interp_comp. I'm going to zero out its location because I've already moved it around in the world, and notice that the static mesh moved relative to that. So we need to check our static mesh and make sure that it's also zeroed out. So make sure that this WIC-SM, this weapon interp_comp static mesh, is zeroed out. Now we don't want to move the weapon itself. We don't want to move that static mesh. The static mesh is attached to this weapon interp_comp. That scene component, weapon interp_comp, that is the component we're going to use for its location when we interpolate, not the static mesh. So do not move the static mesh relative to the interp_comp. Rather, we're going to move the scene component itself, weapon interp_comp. So make sure weapon interp_comp is selected and move it out a ways, just a bit, and then just move it up a little bit. And now we have it up here above the camera. Now we can hit play and we'll see how it looks. It looks like it's just above the camera, and we can adjust it from here. So we can go ahead and move it up just a little bit. So don't select the mesh itself, select the weapon interp_comp and move that up just a little bit. Now hit play and it's a little higher. Okay, so that looks good, but we're going to be able to adjust this once we start interpolating things. So we're going to leave it there for now. Okay, so now that we've adjusted our weapon interp_comp scene component, we're now ready to adjust all 6 of the other interp_comps, and I'm going to add a static mesh to each one. So I'm going to select interp_comp 1, click add components and add a static mesh, and I'm going to call this IC1_SM for interp_comp 1 static mesh. Now if we go to ammo 9mm BP, we'll see that we have our ammo mesh set to shells 45. Now you may have noticed that these are a little bit large. They look a little bit too big for ammo, but we also have a smaller option. If we go to our drop down in 9mm BP and choose shells 45 smaller, there's a smaller version of this and it's not quite as large. So let's use that for our ammo. And let's go back to shooter character BP and let's take our IC1 static mesh and set it to shells 45 smaller. And now our interp_comp1 has a static mesh attached to it with some shells. Now, again, I have the interp_comp1 selected. I'm moving that around. I do not want to move the static mesh itself. The static mesh is just a visual representation of the scene component. It's the scene component itself that we want to move around. So I'm going to move it outwards away from the camera just a bit, maybe just about as much as the weapon, maybe not quite as far, say maybe about right there, and I'll move it to the left just a bit. Now let's hit play and see what this looks like. Okay, so that's an okay interpolation location, but I think I'd like it a little farther from the camera. So I'm going to go ahead and select the scene component, not the static mesh, and move it out a ways. And now I'll hit play, and that looks a little better. Maybe a little bit to the left. So I'm going to go ahead and take our interp_comp and move it just a bit to the left. There we go. That looks pretty good. So now I'm ready to add a static mesh to interp_comp2. So I'm going to go ahead and click on interp_comp2 and click add component, add a static mesh, and I'm going to call this IC2_SM for interp_comp2 static mesh. And I'll go ahead and click on the drop down for static mesh and choose shells _45 smaller. Now I'd like to move it out the same distance away as interp_comp1. So I'm going to select interp_comp1, and I see that its location is at 130 for the X, -50 for the Y. So if I select interp_comp2 and set its X location at 150, then it'll stick my ammo exactly out at 150. Now if I hit play, it looks like it's not quite far enough to the right, so I'm going to move it over just a little bit. Remember, don't select the mesh, select the scene component the mesh is attached to. I'm going to move it over by 1, so it's almost looking good, but not quite. I'm going to move it over just another bit, and now it seems like that's just about right. Okay, so that looks good. Now if I look at it from above, it looks like it's actually a little bit farther out than the first one. So our interp_comp1 is actually at 130. I think I put 150, so it should be at 130 for interp_comp2. There, now it's at 130. Now if we hit play, now it looks better. Okay, now that I'm seeing our ammo, it looks like our weapon is a little too far to the right. So I'd like to make that a little bit more centered relative to the ammo interp locations. So I'm going to move that weapon interp_comp over to the left. So let's select weapon interp_comp, not the static mesh, and I'm going to move it a little bit to the left so that the weapon is right here just about in between the two groups of shells. So I'm going to hit play, and I think that looks a lot better. All right, let's move on. Here we have interp_comp3, and I'm going to go ahead and add a static mesh to this one and call this IC3_SM, and I'm going to add the shells 45 smaller to that, and selecting interp_comp3, I'm going to move it out a bit, and just behind this ammo, I'm going to move it probably about here, and I'll move it up a little bit too, like that. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I'd like it to be sort of just behind it and a little farther away. So I like that. So I'm going to keep that location, and I'm going to add a static mesh to interp_comp4. So let's add a static mesh to that and call this IC4SM and add shells 45 smaller to that. And I'm going to base this on our interp_comp3. So I'm going to select interp_comp3, and it says our location is at 170 for the X and 20 for the Z. Let's go ahead and put interp_comp4 at 170 for the X and 20 for the Z. And I'll go ahead and move it to the right just a bit so that it's just behind this one. So let's hit play, and that looks pretty good. It actually might be, I was going to say it's a little too far to the right, so I might move it over just a bit. Remember, don't select the mesh, select the scene component, and I'll move it over a bit and see how that looks. And I think that looks pretty good. Okay, cool. Let's go ahead and wrap this up by adding static meshes to interp_comp 5 and 6. So I'll select interp_comp 5, add a static mesh, call it IC5SM, and add shells 45 smaller to that. And I'll go ahead and select interp_comp 6, add a static mesh to that, call it IC6SM, and give it also shells 45 smaller. Okay, so I'm going to take interp_comp 5 and I'm going to drag it out a little bit farther than the others. And I'm going to move it to the left like that. And I'm going to also take interp_comp 6, move it out, and drag it a little bit to the right. Now, interp_comp 6 has a location of 210 for the x. Interp_comp 5 has 200. So just to make these consistent, I'm going to make interp_comp 6 go out to 200. And zooming down, I'm going to elevate these just a bit. So I'm going to elevate it to just above that one. That's interp_comp 6. I'll select interp_comp 5 and elevate it as well. And it looks like it's 30 in the Z and 6 is 30 in the Z as well. So let's hit play, see what that looks like. Okay, I'm thinking that they could probably be elevated by 10 or so. So I'm going to go ahead and take 5 and set it to 40 in the Z, and take 6 and set it to 40 in the Z. Let's hit play. Okay, that looks good. All right, so we've gone through all this trouble just to create these scene components that have these locations here relative to the camera. So now when we go and pick up things, we have a bunch of locations to choose from to interpolate to. In the next video, we're going to go about deciding how to determine which interpolation location to interp to. So we'll see you in the next video.